All right, everybody. Let's get started. If you haven't gotten a seat yet, please come in, find a seat. Oh, you're ending up with this one. All right, everyone. We're going to let everybody get their drink refilled. Hi, Dan. But all right, let's get started. I'll warm us up with some housekeeping items. Oh my goodness, the rowdiest people in the room on my panel. All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Bettina Maynard. I am the president and CEO of AHL. Really appreciate all of you being here. And thank you for your interest in this discussion and this topic. We hope that you have lots of questions lined up for this terrific panel. As promised, the housekeeping items. Food refreshment, by now I am certain you have seen it. There are 2 drink tickets for everybody. Restrooms are located on level 1 across from Artisan to the left of the elevators. Parking is validated. Please make sure you get your validation at the front where you got your name tag. And lastly, this event, in case you have not noticed, is being recorded. Okay, a little bit about the event and the series it is part of. Art, architecture, and design are inextricable. I practiced this word, they are linked. These disciplines combine creativity, theories, principles, and methods to create a safer, more beautiful, and ultimately functional world. So in 2017, AHL launched a series of dialogues entitled Art, Architecture, and Design to encourage community dialogue on the interconnectedness of these fields. So we look at how they work together, and with that we examine innovative responses to the challenges in our community. And we hope that these discussions are catalysts for inspiration, connection, and further innovation, and keep the dialogue going when this event is over. So today we're talking about healthcare, access to healthcare. What are the barriers? How can we create a more welcoming portal to help people get the care that they need? And what are the issues that we need to address given the variety of healthcare and the variety of people that need it? Our expert panelists approach these issues with different perspectives. And there's no way I can read their bios. So we printed them, and each one of you should have a little pamphlet in front of you for reference. To my immediate left is Marian Tsuji, the Deputy Director of Behavioral Health with the state of Hawaii. She has broad experience in delivering programs from behavioral health to people with disabilities. Romy Glidewell is Healthcare Division Administrator with the new Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. She is in charge of delivering health care for our correctional facilities, including the state's largest jail, OCCC. Dara Kauhani is the Executive Director of Project Vision Hawaii. She is taking health care to vulnerable populations. And Joey Valenti is the co-founder and CEO of the Albizia Project. And while he is not specifically focused on healthcare, he is an architect with a particular knowledge of nature and its healing impact on people. So let's jump right in with a question for all panelists, except maybe Joy. Trust in health organizations and medical experts has undergone a change since the COVID pandemic that brought on an onslaught of misinformation on social media and some media outlets. So as a result of suspicion about vaccines, diseases that were almost eradicated, such as polio and measles, are on the increase. So what's the temperature in Hawaii? Are you seeing disinformation, or is there any slowdown in people's accessing care? So we're gonna go along here, either which way, and please don't hesitate to respond to each other. So,
is on?
Romy is starting.
Is that on? Yeah, okay. This is a great question, actually. I love this question, because this is actually why I love healthcare and why I got into healthcare in the first place. I actually would correct the question and say we lost the trust of people. Medicine has lost the trust of people prior to COVID, honestly. And it's not just because of Dr. Google undermining us, and it's not just because of the things that we saw during COVID, but medicine started to kind of like believe their own authority, and they started to detach themselves from patients as people, and that whole Dr. God complex became a very real thing. And you see people, I saw people getting delusioned with healthcare, with pharmaceuticals, with their 5-minute appointments with doctors who never even looked at them, way before COVID even happened, honestly. And I think that foundation, that cracking foundation was really just ripe for COVID just being the tree that shot through the floor, essentially. We wouldn't have had that huge momentum of people questioning big pharma and their providers and science and research and all of that stuff if that hadn't already been kind of planted. The thing about that is, to change something, I think it was a dysfunctional medium to begin with, and I think that it was due for change. This was sort of like a gross and rapid way of changing it, and we're having to kind of correct that, but I think that the correction is actually kind of like a really interesting and beautiful thing, because it really is requiring healthcare providers to kind of like take off the white coat and see their patients as people, see their disease as something that they have to live with and how it incorporates into their lives, and sort of adjust treatment plans to what they're able to hear and do and incorporate. And I think that it is time for a compromise and a larger conversation of what are you ready to hear, and then, can you hear what I have to say, and more of like a listening exchange. And I think that that's the temperature that's out there right now, at least in the providers. I'm seeing more and more providers learning how to listen to patients and learning how to translate the scientific dogma and all the research into something that they can actually like hear. I mean, even regularly, I've had patients say to me, no one's ever explained it to me that way. And I'm like, you've had this disease for 30 years. No one's broken it down for you in a way that you can understand. No wonder that we have conflict with each other. No wonder you don't want to take my medicines or come for my labs or see me in this way. And I think that in general, and I'm hoping this across the board, and the younger providers that I'm seeing coming up, they're catching on to that because they've had their own experiences of that disjointed, not feeling like a person, not feeling seen within the healthcare system, and they're making changes. So we're in a transition phase, but I actually think that we're going to a really great place. As healthcare providers, we're going to have to earn the trust of everybody over again, honestly. I really do think in a lot of ways, and that includes the research, the science, all of that, the pharmaceuticals, the place that they have in our lives, the place that vaccinations have in our lives. We kind of have to open that conversation and hear the fear, the concerns, and sort of reframe it for everybody.
Okay.
We don't use these at work, right? We don't.
So I would definitely agree with much of what you said, but I really do think that we've gotten away from being patient-centered and we are more payer-centered. And it's really driven by our insurance companies on whether or not they're going to pay for treatment and how much treatment. And it's become a business rather than a human service.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very true.
I'll just add on a positive note, although there was a lot of mistrust that came out of COVID and that was highlighted during the pandemic, I would say with our organization, we experienced a lot of positive as well, much thanks to both departments that are sitting next to me and our work together. But because of our contract with Department of Health, we were asked to go out and do mobile health clinics, vaccine and testing clinics, out in shelters, out in encampments, homeless encampments, public housings in the prisons and the jails on each island, and then just within communities where we saw a lot of outbreaks. Based on Department of Health's guidance where we went. But we specifically focused on Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders and Filipinos who were hit most at the beginning of the pandemic. And because of those relationships and learning how to work with the communities again that may have already had a distrust of the system, whatever the system was to them, we were able to build those relationships by utilizing community ethnic leaders, church leaders, for example, people who are respected in those specific communities, the leaders in the encampments, in the homeless encampments, for example. And because of those partnerships, we've been able to, yes, provide care during the pandemic, but that allowed us to engage folks back into the medical system that maybe they haven't been in for a long time. And now we still have those connections with folks, a few years out. So we're really grateful. We still do rotations at many of the sites that we provided care during the pandemic, and because of that relationship building over the last few years, we've been able to reach a higher level of care. And for many of our folks that are experiencing other, social determinants of health, we're able to link them with other types of care holistically. So just one positive out of the pandemic.
Yeah, I can chime in on this. First, I'm just going to say I'm 100% behind what you all are saying, and I'm actually really impressed with the response because when I heard the question, I was like, oh, this is like very politicized, and I didn't know like how people in healthcare would react. But I feel the same, and I actually, in a way, like I'm a patient. I didn't prepare for this at all. Like I didn't know this question was going to be in there, but my example is right after I graduated, actually, like 2016, my mom was hospitalized. She was a kidney transplant patient, and she was on immunosuppressants and was successful actually for about a decade. Her sister gave her a transplant, and in that phase of my life, I guess, maybe like in my teenage years, early 20s, when I saw that success, like I was a huge fan of Western medicine. It saved my mom's life, extended her life for a long time. but what happened when she was hospitalized, she was actually in a coma, and we found out like a few months into her being in care that they were the food they were giving her through the IV was a Nestle product, and it was one of the first ingredients was high fructose corn syrup. And my family kind of stepped in on that, and we had to fight really hard, but we actually switched it to like a natural Whole Foods product, which was really hard to get approved by the hospital. And she did end up passing away, but that was where that moment there was where I had a reality check with like, why are they putting this in her body when basically you're trying to reduce inflammation. And I learned a lot in that process, and COVID happened shortly after, and like you were saying, I was one of the people that was starting to question and have mistrust in the system. And I think what's happening now, it's very extreme to one side, very extreme to the other. I think that pendulum's swinging really hard, so it's like making people really confused and really distracted by this misinformation, but there is truth there. And I think what's happening is necessary because, like you're saying, that reform, that kind of shift in the people being prioritized over the money has to happen. So.
Thank you for sharing. Okay, in January of this year, the World Health Organization declared loneliness a global health concern. The US Surgeon General issued a 71-page advisory warning of an American epidemic of loneliness and isolation. What are you seeing in Hawaii? And how are we dealing with this phenomenon? And I have to apologize, it's so unprofessional. My husband was supposed to pick her up at 3 o'clock. My husband is in the doghouse. And this is a foster to adopt. So it's terrible. So, all right, anyway, back to loneliness. What are you seeing in Hawaii, and how are we dealing with this phenomenon?
Sure, I'll go off of the cute dog story. So one way that we're addressing loneliness at one of our shelters, for example, we have a pet and art therapy session that we do. And so we do have a lot of our folks with pets that like to share their hugs and cuddles with the others. What we're seeing, we work primarily with the unsheltered community, and what we're seeing in the point-in-time count every year is that our population of folks on the streets are getting older and older. But according to, again, that point-in-time count in our data, people on the streets, their life expectancy is about 53. As compared to the general population, that's obviously much lower. But we are seeing a lot more of our kupuna that are in need of shelter. And so Project Vision is part of the Kauhale campaign with the governor's office and with Department of Human Services. We have the privilege of having 3 Kauhales, previously also another that's transitioned over. But it's been heartbreaking personally to watch how many of our kupuna are in need of spaces to go. And of course, with age comes a lot more ailments as well. And so as much as we can try to create, again, that holistic environment where we're addressing not only their healthcare needs, their social needs, but also looking at, as they age, what's going to be needed long-term for them, and trying to keep up with different activities, create those relationships. I think I'll probably talk about in every answer the power of building those relationships and the importance of trust, especially with our marginalized communities. So we've been trying to create mentorship programs on site, workforce development programs on site, and really give preference by vulnerability, as all the other homeless homeless service providers do, and take care of our kupuna first and foremost, especially those with severe mental illness and with behavioral health issues. But unfortunately, we've just seen more and more, and so I'm grateful for the efforts of how to get creative about housing our kupuna off the streets. None of us want to see that, and we obviously need to come up with a solution as a state for that.
I'm going to add and just kind of talk a little bit more broadly about the general population. I think that with COVID, with technology, we all kind of saw everybody kind of bring their circle, really close it up. And what we found with our Hawaii Cares line, which is our crisis line, is an uptick of folks that are just calling not because they're in crisis, but because they need somebody to talk to. They just want to talk story. They want to have another human being interact with them and just respond back and give them affirmation. So with our Hawaii Cares line, we've been getting more folks, repeat callers. So they'll call and they'll say, "Oh, is Betita working tonight?" So that they can reconnect with her because they already have that relationship. And so we're trying to gravitate more towards setting up a warm line so that the folks that really are in crisis can get through on the crisis line, and folks that just want to talk story because of the loneliness can talk.
Can you accommodate that many people? I mean, how many people
Do you mind if I add
are that?
something to that?
I mean, you need a lot of people, I would think.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because, you know, the time of day when people call is kind of throughout the 24 hours. But we just implemented texting, and what we're finding is with the kids, they will text us as opposed to calling us and talking, whereas the older folks will call. They want to have a conversation with people.
If I can just add, I'll say that one thing that we've noticed within the Kauhale system is that a lot of our folks that are coming off of the streets and a lot of our kupuna are preferring to live in congregate settings. So, you know, living in more of a village type setting rather than having their own independent space. I'm not speaking for everyone, of course, but there is a subset of folks that like being around other people, like sharing those meal times, like sharing the laundry facility so that they can have that constant communication. And so that's been a perk. We've actually seen some individuals who have gone through the program, gotten their own individual spaces, but actually wanted to come back to the congregate setting because all of their friends were there. We've actually made a transition for our staff. We took off a lot of their roles of security and things like that. We've outsourced that, and the job description of our staff is to interact with the residents now. And so we're like, that is your first and foremost, that is your job, to interact, get to know, and build those relationships and keep them company. Come up with activities that will keep their minds going, but really just keeping them company and feeling like they have someone to talk to 24/7. So just wanted to note that.
Absolutely, and I'm going to take this in a slightly different way because I'm going to talk about my population a little bit specifically. And I love that loneliness is actually like being talked about in a real way around the world for the first time. It's sad that we've gotten to that place, and we've gotten to that place because of social media and our cell phones, because they've created this like alternate reality, and we've detached from that interpersonal connection that not only did we rely on it, but it was literally necessary to live. Like, you had to call people, you had to I still show up at my friends' houses unannounced. I'm determined to continue to do that. Oh, I'm in your neighborhood. I knocked on the door and they're like, oh, that's weird. I'm like, yeah, I know, but this is what we still need to do. Let's not forget that this is what we used to do. Most of us grew up just showing up at a friend's house to see if they could play or hang out or whatever, and I think we need to continue to do that. But the reason that I'm so grateful that this is actually becoming a diagnostic criteria, and it's becoming something that's acknowledged, that's something that's treatable, is because this is how inmates have lived forever. They are artificially disconnected to their worlds. and for long periods of time sometime. And we have been treating and dealing with loneliness behind bars for a really long time. And I say we because I am the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitations, I'm healthcare, but also as a society, this is what we've asked for, right? Like we've asked that these people be separated and be like put on a timeout for whatever reason to like review what they did and how they can be different and better. But we have to battle what that loneliness actually is to them inside, and it negatively affects how we were able to rehabilitate them. When they are depressed and isolated and inconsolable because they can't contact a family member or a child or, we have people lose parents while they're incarcerated, right? And they don't ever get to like talk to their family when that happens, cousins, whoever. But we expect them to listen to us and to like adjust their behavior and to be rehabilitated in that way, and it doesn't really work. And as we're moving forward with new designs, it's really interesting because we're taking loneliness into account as we're trying to imagine the future of corrections, right? We're trying to imagine like, the milieu within the inmates needs to be different, with security it needs to be different, with healthcare staff it needs to be different, and even with our community. They need to have access to programs. They need to be able to like communicate with their family and have more, like we're looking at, a lot of mainland facilities have like family rooms where like you can actually like interact with your family and have these moments. And so we're trying to take all of that into consideration. It's made my life so much easier that the World Health Organization and psychologists in general have said like, hey, this is a real condition that we need to address. And all of us are susceptible to it. But finally, like my patients, it's like I don't have to fight for that anymore, which I'm really, really grateful for.
So I'm gonna shift a little bit and give Joey a question about the type of environment that lends itself for healing, or to healing, I should say. Go run with it.
So the question is, what in the built environment can lend itself to healing, essentially? Okay.
Sorry, I'm off script.
No. Let's see. So
You have a lot of experience with natural materials.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're finding is that the warmth often that comes with the use and the implementation of natural materials, it has an impact on how people feel, how it impacts their senses. It can be calming or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so to give you all a little context, it was briefly mentioned that my background is in architecture and design. My specialty is in wood. So I take, if you haven't heard of Albizia Project, what we do is we take invasive Albizia trees out of Hawaii's forest and turn it into building material. We make all kinds of interior millwork, anything from custom door, window systems, ceiling grills, wall paneling, flooring, all kinds of stuff. And I think that's the question and why I was selected today, is because I have that understanding of these materials that we have here locally. And I think it comes to like this relationship to the natural environment. So, if we all close our eyes and imagine we're in the middle of a forest, or your favorite place in nature, and you have, this sensory explosion essentially of like what you're seeing, what you're hearing, the sounds, the textures, all of the things that exist in that natural environment, which, when we're in a building like this, much of that's taken away. So I think, when you bring in a natural material like wood, and there's many others, but I'll focus on wood because that's where I specialize. That piece of nature is brought into the space, and that connection starts to come back. So I think what happens there is, if we can start to kind of incorporate those elements, that you kind of get that sensory connection to almost that spiritual side of who we are, right? Doesn't matter what your belief system, when you're out there in nature, like, you have this spiritual connection, almost like back to where we originated from, before all of the built environments existed. So I think what materials can do is essentially that. If you can start to incorporate that sensory experience into what you design, there's studies that actually show that impact can heal. It can give you more creativity, more motivation. Takes away a lot of that, like, stress that you sometimes feel in an office environment or in a hospital. So I think there's a very important factor there in what we do with the materials and how we design them, and it comes back to that connection.
Thank you. I'm going to stick with facilities a little bit. Miriam, in your work with corrections, vocational rehabilitation programs for adults with disabilities, and now the spectrum of mental health services for the Department of Health, what have you observed about facilities? And how could they, I'm the architect, right? So how could they be improved? What are you looking for in an ideal world? And I'm going to ask you the same question.
I think very much what Joey was just saying. Nature is such a powerful healing component. And if you look at we have a new facility on the state hospital grounds, and it was designed with the entire environment in mind. And every single room, patient room, has a view of the coal house. It's really calming, it's grounding, and for our patients, something like this is really important. You go to lower campus, where some of these buildings are 30, 40 years old, no view, no window. It's pretty grim. So as we rebuild some of these facilities, it does impact on behavior, on healing, on access. I just came back from Japan and was so impressed that at Narita Airport, they had a room that was a silent room for people with developmental disabilities, basically for people with autism. And I thought, oh my gosh, so many people with kids that have autism don't want to travel because you don't know whether or not your kid's going to have a meltdown. You don't know if they're going to get overstimulated with all that stuff that's going on. And to have a place where you can go to get away from all that stimulation, wow. That's like incredible access.
That is awesome.
So,
thank you.
I don't really remember the question exactly, but I think I'm pretty close. So what are we looking for, right? And when we take into consideration, health, well-being, rehabilitation programs, all that kind of stuff. I'm actually a huge fan of architecture from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. I really like austere lines. I like the material that we were using back then. I work in these old buildings, and they're very problematic functionally for today's era. I don't have enough electrical outlets. I can't get Wi-Fi. Every room is a Faraday box, essentially. So those are our challenges right now. And also the era of correctional architecture in general was very dark corners, everything's isolated. They weren't considering community milieu at the time. So when I imagine and I think about where we're going and what I need, and I really do try to like project us pretty far into the future, because by the time we get it all built and everything, we have to kind of like anticipate a reality that doesn't even exist yet. But the things that I would say are a huge priority to me are sound, light, and function. And when I think about sound, light, and function, I think about materials. You know, I love a cement building, but it's really loud. And it does tend to be where everybody leans when it comes to corrections. But I have patients much the same way, where I can tell that they're overstimulated and their nervous system is essentially like exhausted. We tend to have more fights, more sundowning, more problems later in the evening when everybody's just kind of like exhausted from this intense vibration from the sound just bouncing off of everything all the time. So I think that, and back to loneliness, I think that those, you know, closed off walls, when you don't have sunlight, you don't have connection, even if you can't get to somebody, being able to see another person, I think is really important. And then obviously function, it's like, where are we going as far as electronics go? Like, we're moving into a world where inmates may have their own tablets for educational purposes, for communication purposes. Like, what does that look like? We've never had that kind of model. It's being rolled out all over the place, but that means that the electronics and the foundation of all that stuff has to be considered pretty early on, you know. So those are probably the three things that I would say become critical in the evolution of correctional architecture for me.
Okay, Dara, you're using mobile units to get to your patients, to your clients. What are the elements that you need to create a welcoming and a safe environment?
Yeah, so we're a little different. We work outside completely, so I agree with you. We don't have built space except for the mobile trailers that we have, the mobile clinics or mobile hygiene units. And honestly, the most successful method for us delivering care would be on foot with a backpack and a rolly cart of all the medical supplies you need for wound care. You know, we definitely love our mobile clinics and our mobile hygiene units, so folks can take private hot showers, so that they can have one-on-one, you know, with the providers if they need to. But we usually get the most interaction when we go to folks where they are. So whether that's, you know, just a couple days ago, I was out with our superstar APRN on Maui, and she literally was providing care, doing wound care, sitting on a curb right next to someone. That's where they're used to, that's where they're comfortable, and they don't go to the clinics anymore. They haven't for decades because they feel like not in my backyard also applies to not in my clinic, right? So they're not wanted there. They feel like the stigma follows them. And so the only doctor that they will see is our doctor who comes to them on a weekly basis to wrap them up and slowly see that wound heal. So very different. Agree with the natural environment for folks that have been living on the streets. That is where they're comfortable, and so that's what we do, is to make an effort to show that consistency and to show that extra care, that non-judgmental care, that wherever you're at, you're important enough that we want to come to you and provide this service to you. So really grateful for the opportunities that we have with our fleet to go out into the most rural areas, you know, have the supplies that we need to provide quality care, but do it in an innovative way. And thankfully, since COVID, there are a lot of other providers that are also starting to jump on that bandwagon as well. We're seeing a lot more mobile units, and that just means more folks will have access to care. And so it's great to see those go into the schools, you know, go to serve our justice involved into the prisons and jails, go into the public housing spaces, and into these rural communities. We just received a grant, and we do a partnership with DOH to go down to Ka'u and Ocean View on the Big Island. And so doing that monthly and bringing vision care, hearing, dental, vaccines, primary care, down to a space where there isn't usually a provider there consistently. Being in Honolulu, of course, we have access to folks almost any time, but we learned a lot, our organization learned a lot from our history. We actually started as an international organization, so my 10 years before coming home was setting up clinics and camps, surgical camps, in the most rural areas. Right now we're setting up clinics in the Marshall Islands and in some parts of Micronesia, for example. So we're used to going in with nothing, having hardly any resources. What have the airlines decided you would actually get with you when you land in this space? And sometimes you're missing 3 bags, and sometimes you don't have any electricity and the power goes out. And how do you make do? And so are really grateful for our team of badasses that go out on the streets every day and make do but still provide that quality care. But I think the most important aspect of that is the non-judgmental, compassionate care and just showing that extra effort for folks.
I think you kind of answered this question, but I do want to ask it specifically. What do you think our current healthcare facilities could do or improve on to provide access to the population that you serve?
Yeah, I guess I would emphasize that non-judgmental, harm reductive type care. I mentioned the not in my clinic, which is reflective of that not in my backyard NIMBYism that we see. Of course, we have a lot of our unsheltered that are on the streets right now that have, some of them have the criminal background, some of them have substance use history, and some of them haven't showered in a long time. And so when they have to go into the systems, into a hospital, and they're automatically treated, folks don't want to sit by them, they're automatically ignored by the receptionist. I think, really grateful that we've become a trauma-informed care state, and I hope that every private practice, every office, every hospital will have their staff go through that trauma-informed care training so that we can really provide what's necessary. All of our folks deserve quality care, whether they, no matter what their status is. I know all of us totally believe that. And so it definitely makes an impact if you greet someone with a smile. If you see that someone is malnourished, offer them some water, offer them a snack as they wait. Any of that could go a huge distance for our folks that have been, dehumanized in their everyday lives. And so hoping that the way that we provide care, hopefully will show that there are providers that do accept them as they are, do want to see them progress, and do want to be there every step of the way. And our goal is not to be their primary care provider, it's to get them back into the health system, to show them that there are providers who care and will serve no matter what their background is.
Thank you. Romy, I have a question for you. The Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation is a relatively new department, and I think it is there to show the shift from a traditionally, or not traditionally, historically more punitive model into a rehabilitative, restorative model. So could you share some of the changes that you've implemented and what are your plans to support this new vision?
Gosh. So yes, our department changed from the Department of Public Safety, which was entangled with law enforcement, to the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. And correction reform, it's out there, it's happening. It's actually really exciting because it's not just happening on an external level, but I just got back from the American Corrections Association training for people who do what I do. And on a national level, it is changing, and it's changing fast. it's changing so fast. It's actually like people are leaving because they just can't even adjust to how quickly we're changing and how accommodating we're trying to be. But the concept that, we don't even like to call them inmates anymore. We call them residents. Some people call them resident patients, or, even the terms that we're using, because we're trying to destigmatize what happens. That's like a huge part of it. And so even I'm in healthcare, and I insist on calling them patients. I've called them patients since I started. Before I was an administrator, I was like, no, they're patients. They're always going to be patients. Like, that's what they need to be identified as. When they become anything else, it becomes hard to care for them in the role that we've agreed to care for them as. So I've been in my position now for just about a year, and it's been really actually fun and exciting and empowering to feel the support from my deputy director, from my director, all the way up to the governor's office, that this is really a change that's going to happen on a national level. And I'm actually really proud to say that Hawaii I go to these mainland conventions, and we're doing all the things we're supposed to be doing. I mean, transgender care, geriatric care, the way that we house people has become very different. Stigmatizing language has become very different. I'm trying to think of making changes on a large scale in a state institution is very slow. So, we have to start with policy. Policies take a couple years to change. So I will say that me and my medical director and the staff, we are trying to make changes that don't require policy changes. Being trauma-informed is a huge one. Historically, everybody goes after all the adult corrections officers need to be trauma-informed. And I was like, so do my nurses and my medical providers. Everybody does. Anybody who comes in contact with an inmate resident needs to be trauma-informed, because at the end of the day, trauma is probably the number one diagnostic disorder with my patients, really, whether they bring it forward or they don't. So just having that connection with them and recognizing them just as humans and listening to them and not treating them any differently than you would anybody else is kind of my number one rule with all of my staff. And there's a lot. I mean, but that's we'll start with there.
Want to chime in?
I forget what you asked.
I'll just keep on going. You mentioned gender. Marian, in your current work, how do gender differences influence a program or maybe the facility? Do you have any specific examples?
I would have to go back to my correctional work. I did a lot of work with gender responsive programming. And, within the correctional facilities, 90% at that time were male and only 10% women. And so most of the programs were developed around men, and they were normed around men. And what normally would happen is they would take the programs, and they were built for men, and they would just put it over at the women's facility and say, hey, this is your program. And it really wouldn't be successful. And it was really interesting, because what they also found was, Pia's like, yeah, we know this, because she worked with me on this project, that when we create programs for women and we replicate them for men, it's successful. And it's really because in so many ways, women are much more social, they're much more articulate about, and more in touch with their feelings, and are willing to express that. And so it goes into the design of the program. And with the men, they don't even know, but these programs that touch upon these things really kind of a help to unleash and heal. So we look at things like that. Parents. Women are not the only parents. So we create these spaces for women inmates to be able to interact with their children. But the men also have children. And what happens when your kids are coming in to see you in prison, and there's not really a nurturing kind of a space for you to interact. So likewise, it's the same with folks that have mental illness. We want them to have family. We want them to be the parents and be able to interact with their kids in a nurturing way. It's a little bit different at the hospital because we have grounds. We've got a beautiful 3-acre garden, and we allow folks to walk in green space, which is a little bit different, but.
Can I add to that? Yeah, that's interesting because the deputy and I have noticed that we don't have as many men's programs right now, and I think that there's been like a backlash, right? Like all of society and community has been like, oh, women's, and I get phone calls like, oh, from all kinds of people, I won't name specifically, oh, we've been working with the women's program, what can we do more for the women? And currently, right now, we are having a shortage of male-focused programs, because I just think the trend, right? Like I don't like to think of things as limited resources, but we're on an island very far away. And, I joke all the time, we do have limited resources. I actually reached out to some friends of mine and asked them if they would do a yoga teacher training piece as part of like a mental health program under me. And they're like, oh, there's all these programs on the mainland that do that. I was like, yes, on the mainland. I was like, we're in Hawaii. I have limited resources. Y'all are my resources. This is how this works. And we do need to kind of like recognize that. Like sometimes all the resources move to one gender or one community or one population, and then there's sort of like a backlash. So we're currently in the process of trying to sort of rebuild and look at what men's programs and men's programming actually looks like. And I will say the interesting thing is that most people underestimate the softness, like you said, of men who are incarcerated. And they often don't create programs, like you said, exactly. It's like those programs that are built for women to articulate feelings and to kind of express frustration and to have that intimate connection with family and people around them. Everybody doesn't just assume that that's what they need, but it really is. I mean, most of my patients are extremely tender-hearted and very much need that. One of the rules with my patients is that they're allowed to cry in the rooms with me because they can't cry out there. So when stuff comes up, and I'm a medical provider, I'm not in mental health. I do oversee mental health, but it's shocking how often those pieces come up in a medical visit because I've created a safe space for them, because I'm a female, because I'm safe, because we have a little bit of privacy, we have glass, but nobody can hear what we're saying. And so for the first time in maybe 100 days, they're allowed to let their guard down, and even just for a little while. And right behind that guard, when it comes down and they express their frustration, their sadness, their challenges, there's tears. So we just turn their back to the window and they get to like express that, because we haven't created a program or a space for these men to do that in a way. And we all know it's healthy, we all know it's necessary. And instead we ask them to just like hold it down until you're out of here. Even evidence-based practice doesn't allow us to go into any trauma care in a correctional facility because it's a traumatizing environment to begin with. So we have these folks who we live with, and we're not supposed to talk about anything too heavy or too serious or too real. And we're just supposed to hope that they get that attention and that need met on the outside. Yet we have this fixed population, we have this fixed time, and we're not really utilizing it. But we have to create safe spaces, physically create safe spaces, as well as like personally create that. Those are the programs that like I would like to see coming into both the male and the female facilities in the future.
Thank you. All right, I am looking at my watch. I have lots more questions. I'm gonna ask Joey one more, but this is the heads up for everybody that if you have a question, there is a microphone right behind Danny, right there. Please use that and take advantage of this incredible panel of experts that you have here. Okay, my question for Joey. Can you share an example of a building that is inspired by natural elements?
Yeah, I'd like to start with maybe an architect instead, and then I'll get into some buildings. But Shigeru Ban is a world-renowned Japanese architect, and he's always been one of my most inspiring architects just because of his use of natural materials. He's really always been on the cutting edge of that kind of integration of natural and like appropriate scale. He works with all kinds of forms and materials. A lot of his projects are like, if you've heard of grid shell construction, where he's got like curved glulam beams and like a fabric as like or a canvas as like the roof material. So I'm not gonna specify one of his projects, but I thought maybe more so I'd get into like that method of construction. Mass timber. Can I get a show of hands if you know mass timber construction? Really, not too many. Okay, so mass
There's
timber.
a lot more people in here that just raised their hands that know what mass timber construction is. I hope.
Well, I'll give a good summary of it and kind of dive into some examples. So mass timber is essentially a technology. Most people have heard of glulam beams or posts. That's a mass timber product. Cross-laminated timber. These materials aren't common here, but if you're in the Pacific Northwest or even all over Europe, they've been around for a long time, and they're growing in popularity because of their environmental impact, and I think also just that that connection of nature where you have more wood in your building. So Shigeru Ban was I think he's been an expert at using these materials in different applications, and I wanted to highlight this just as an example of like how we can look at this at larger scales. We're talking about hospitals, commercial buildings. I'm actually, one of my other hats is I have a small architecture firm with some colleagues from my program, and we're doing a custom CLT home right now. So CLT is kind of the hot mass timber product right now. So basically, if you think of like a sheet of plywood, everyone's seen plywood, so I think that's a good reference. Now, if you scale that up to 40 feet long by 8 feet wide, and made up of 2x4s in like 3 to 5 layers, cross-laminating those panels. So what you end up with is like a giant mass panel of solid wood. So that wood can now be erected and kind of replace structural walls, floors, ceilings, and it's a really beautiful product. So just like glulam, like it's basically like a bunch of pieces of wood laminated to make a beam, and you could bend that. You could glue it up with like a curve, different forms. CLT is more of a solid mass panel. So if you think of like multi-story buildings, they're made often here with steel and concrete. Well, you can actually replace that with wood now. It's really hard to get Hawaii on board with this. So we're spearheading a project on Kauai right now that's about to break ground. It's just a residential home, but the client is from Pacific Northwest, so she was advocating very hard for something more innovative, something that's like she's familiar with where she came from. So luckily we've had a client that's been like pushing for it, but definitely the hardest project I've had so far. It's taken several years to find a contractor like willing to take it on, but what I'm getting at here is when you can start to bring these materials like what we're not so familiar with here into these applications, I think that's where we can start to actually see like this, scaling of potentially using wood products in these more hospital or larger scale settings. And what I'd like to kind of stack that with is kind of where I'm coming from and what I'm trying to bring to Hawaii. I know you guys had done food security, I think, on the last panel. So what I'm trying to do essentially with Albizia Project, and I'm going to drop a plug here, but we're actually expanding into a larger facility where we're going to be supplying innovative building materials, specifically with local Hawaii-grown woods. Not just Albizia, but a whole array of what's available locally. But we want to really try to bring these types of products to Hawaii. And essentially, you can imagine a building like this, where instead of this ceiling being concrete, it's exposed wood. And that wood is a structural material that potentially could be using our local resources. So we're not quite there yet, but I think we're getting close. This house is a good stepping stone, and I think over the coming years we'll be setting up for this type of application. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Something to look forward to. Okay. Any kind of question anybody has? Or does anybody have a question? Pia.
Election, how do you think that you can bulletproof against some of the things that we're talking about, privatization of prisons and some of the directors of health and Medicare and Medicaid? Can we bulletproof?
I'll jump in just because I was literally at the Capitol last week. I was lucky enough to be in Virginia at the American Corrections Association training as President-elect Trump was choosing his cabinet, and we have a lobbyist firm who was at Capitol Hill and kind of like bringing us like up-to-date things on bills that are already like on the table right now. And then they did ask us a question of like, what do we want to focus on in the next 4 years? Because you do have to take any administration's agenda into consideration. We're not going to sit on our hands for the next 4 years, so what can we get across? And I am not an authority. I am definitely learning. This is a different kind of administration completely. It's been very hard to kind of, him appointing RFK as HHS is interesting, right? Like you kind of usually know where a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican president is going to go with certain things. And healthcare, marginalized populations tend to be very low on the list. But we might see something completely different. I will say that our lobbyist firm and what we kind of decided to do is we might not get funding for things. We had like a $62 billion bill out there that we were asking for. We've been asking for like, I think $11 billion for corrections to eradicate Hep C. I don't know if you guys know this, but a Hep C treatment for one individual is about $30,000. So it's a huge part of my budget is treating people with Hep C. All of our facilities kind of suffer and with trying to figure that out. So that was one thing that we're not anticipating this coming administration. But it doesn't mean that we aren't going to ask for asks. We're trying to come up with like what are not dollar associated asks. One of the things that we struggle with is that a physician, for instance, the incarcerated population tends to be very litigious for all kinds of things. Sometimes it's frivolous, sometimes it's not. One of the challenges is that anybody who works in healthcare and has a professional license can be named individually and be sued individually by an inmate for any reason. And like I said, sometimes they're totally justified. A lot of the times they're not. The challenge is that if the state decides to settle the case, because like all lawsuits, sometimes we settle cases because it's more reasonable because the amount of money is very tiny. That professional will have that on their license forever, that the case was settled against them. One of the things that we've asked for, and we've been asking for a long time, is some kind of indemnification for providers so that they will continue to come to work and not be afraid of that. One of the biggest difficulties I have in hiring people is just that piece, is them feeling safe that they won't be targeted for something frivolous and lose their license, or having these marks on their license because they've chosen to come and work with a population that gets agitated, that is litigious, partially because sometimes it makes sense. If they can get a little bit of money, they're walking out with a little bit of money that they didn't have before. I don't even begrudge them that. It's sometimes just a good tactic. It's just challenging because it's my staff that ends up having to pay for it. And sometimes it's valid, but it's the first question every provider asks me: have you been sued? What do you do about this? It's a real genuine concern. And I want to get the best care for them. I don't want it to be people who are just like comfortable or aren't worried about it. Good providers should be worried about this, but they should also be like feeling safe that they can come in and give care to the folks that I have in my facilities as well. So we're asking the administration for things like that, things that don't have a dollar amounts, but bills that will kind of allow us to continue to care in sort of a different way. So that's the thing that we're mostly focusing on in this new administration. But I genuinely think it could go either way. There's not a clear path that this administration is moving towards, honestly. It's going to be interesting.
I think that we're extremely concerned. You asked the question about Medicaid, Medicare, and Judy Moore-Peterson, who is in charge of Medicare, just put in for another waiver. And there are great new changes that are in that waiver that we're waiting for CMS to approve that really are culturally appropriate for us. So it includes, reimbursement for Lomi. It's non-traditional healing that we need to be able to, again, it goes back to what I was saying before. We've gotten away from being patient-centered and becoming payer-centered, and so we're only dishing out the kind of care that will be paid for. And it's not necessarily what people need. And we really need to shift that. And, we've been doing that, and there's been great strides in that. And I'm just really hopeful that we can get everything through before January.
I will say that they're passing a lot of the Medicaid bills. They're they're on the floor this week and last week, because they are trying to get as much of them through as they possibly can in the last couple of months we have here. Yeah.
I'll just say I was recently on a call with other executive directors of social service nonprofits, and of course we rely heavily on funding that comes from Department of Human Services, specifically for our mental health population, specifically for our justice involved, specifically for our unsheltered. We're not sure exactly where that's going to go, but I know that many of us are looking towards private funding, private land, private space, and so we're going to have to, based on what we see happens, we're going to have to rely on a lot of private funders. So I'm sure many of us nonprofits are going to be seeking donations from you folks. So thank you in advance for your generosity. The end of the year is coming up soon. Avoid taxes.
All right, thank you. Is there another question? There is no.
I have a question.
Okay.
I have a question for all of you. The Department of Health just opened up a behavioral health crisis center. It's over in Evelay. And my question to you is, what does that look like? Is it dark? Is it bright? Is it crowded? What does it look like?
In their imagination, if they haven't been, you mean how do they visualize something like that? Yeah.
It's a behavioral health crisis center. So it's people that are in crisis who think that they might commit suicide, they might hurt somebody else, but have enough wherewithal to know that they need some intervention, and now. But when you think about what a government facility looks like, do you think gray? Do you think kind of mismatched furniture? Maybe some broken chairs?
Now she's talking about my facilities.
Dirty carpets, broken tiles. We really switched this one out and made this into a really welcoming, airy, clean facility. And, you know, most of the folks that come to us are houseless. And it's really welcoming and inviting to them, and it helps to build the trust. And if we don't provide folks with clean, welcoming places to go, it's like, how do they feel safe? How will they ever come back to eventually, yeah, I do need help. A lot of the folks cycle through, and it's like addiction treatment, right? You need a couple of times to go through. Just because you failed the first time doesn't mean that you shouldn't try a second time or a third time or a fourth time. And that's what, you know, we all do, is we believe that folks can change, and it may not happen that first time, that second time. It may take a few times to get them back on their feet. But in order for us to reach out to people, we can't expect people to come to us. We have to meet them where they are, the non-judgment. And I'm going to just leave you with some photos of what our new facility looks like. And it is really open. Rather than beds, we have reclining chairs. So we don't expect people to stay for a very long time. We expect them to stay for under a day. So you get a recliner chair. We've got extra large sizes. And they're comfortable. There are staff come in and play games with them, and, you know, just get them to talk and get their mind off of the initial kind of trauma. And, you know, it says something to people when how do we all feel when we go into a facility that's filthy, that's kind of dirty? You just want to get out of there. It's like, get your business done and get out of there, right? So why wouldn't we provide that for our patients?
Thank you for bringing that. I can't wait to have a look. Okay, we are at the end of our time. I want to do two things. I want to say thank you to all of you that took time to come and spend your Wednesday evening with us and give us the opportunity to have a conversation about the importance of access to health care. So thank you. And then I would like to thank this panel of experts. They are not only leaders in their fields, but to me, they are true heroes, unsung heroes. Thank you for what you do. Thank you.